Welcome to this video where we continue taking a look at Bertrand Russell's Principles of Mathematics. In the last video, I started with chapter 4 and I worked through giving some explanations, some commentary and some interpretations of sections 46, 47 and 48. So naturally in this video we're going to be kicking off with section 49. So it's going to work in pretty much the same way as the previous video. I'm going to be reading through and every now and again I'm going to be stopping, giving some kind of interpretation or explanation to the best of my ability of what I think Russell is trying to say in this book. So this is a very difficult book in my opinion to read and to understand. There's a lot of information in there. It's not easy to condense it down. So what I would like to do really is to actually condense Principles of Mathematics down into a much shorter video, but really there's just so much information in there. It's very difficult to do that, if not impossible, really. It's just one of those books that you have to put the time in to try and to understand it. So it's over 10 years now since I first came across this book, and there's still lots and lots of stuff in it that I don't fully understand. So there's no guarantee as we go through this video that I'm going to be able to explain absolutely everything. Some paragraphs there's probably not going to be too much for me to say. Other paragraphs there's going to be a bit more for me to say. For some parts I might not say anything just because I don't necessarily fully understand what I'm reading in some cases. If there is something that I don't understand, then I will usually draw attention to it and actually say I don't understand this. But obviously if I don't understand it I can't really say anything about it. So okay, off we go then. Let's see how far we get with this video, because it does take a while to get through the sections, evidently. So starting with section 49 then, it might be thought that a distinction... Oh, let me bring it up on the screen actually before I get started. Where are we? Right, there we go. Okay, so it might be thought that a distinction ought to be made between a concept as such and a concept used as a term. Between, example, such pairs as is and being, human and humanity, one, in such a proposition as this is one, and one in one is a number. Okay, so what Russell is getting at here is we've already kind of come across this in the previous video, if I remember rightly. We've got this these two words, human and humanity. To give one example, human is an adjective, and we've got a very closely aligned this other closely aligned word, humanity, which plays a slightly different role. So what Russell says is, which section is it in? Right, so section 47, he says, human and humanity denote precisely the same concept. Okay, so we've clearly got, I may have said this in the previous video, but we've clearly got a grammatical difference between these two words, human and humanity. But according to Russell, they denote precisely the same concepts. Now, going back right to the beginning of this chapter, again, I probably said this in there might be some repetition in this video. Sometimes I repeat things because I can't remember exactly what I've said. Other times I repeat things because it's important and it needs repetition to kind of for me to emphasize that it is actually an important point. So right at the beginning of this chapter, Russell says that a grammatical distinction cannot be uncritically assumed to correspond to a genuine philosophical difference. So it may do, it may not do. In this case, we've got a grammatical difference that doesn't correspond to a philosophical difference. The way that the words are used, so he uses human as in Socrates is human. So this would be a proposition of the subject-predicate form. So Socrates would be the subject. He would refer to this as is human as the assertion, because what he says, I can't remember which part of the book it is now, in which chapter it is, but he takes issue with analysing a subject's a proposition of what might be traditionally understood as being in the subject predicate form into. He has an issue with analysing this into subject and predicate, because it misses out the verb. Okay, so we've got Socrates, which is the subject, and we've got human, which is the predicate. So if we try to analyse Socrates as human into Socrates and human, something goes missing. The verb is. So what Russell does, here it is. I've made a note of it actually. Section 43. So I won't bring it up on the screen, but section 43 says it's always been customary to divide propositions into subject and predicate, but this division has the defect of omitting the verb. It's true that a graceful concession is sometimes made by loose talk about the copula, but the verb deserves far more respect than is thus paid to it. We may say broadly that every proposition may be divided, some in only one way, some in several ways, into a term, the subject, and something which is said about the subject, which something I call the assertion. Thus, Socrates is a man may be divided into Socrates and is a man. The verb, which is the distinguishing mark of propositions, remains with the assertion, but the assertion itself, being robbed of its subject, is neither true nor false. Okay, so section 43. So in this case, we've got Socrates is human. We've got a proposition of a certain form, but then we can also have humanity belongs to Socrates. Okay, so what's going on here is we've got a relation now. We've got two terms. So in the previous case, we had Socrates, which was just one term. Okay, but now we've got two terms, humanity and Socrates, and now we've got a relation. Okay, so when we want to, it depends what we want to do. What's the relation that we want to express? Okay, depending on which relation we want to express, it depends which word we're going to be forced to use, because as I said in the previous video, we're kind of forced when we want to represent these ideas, we're forced to use grammar, a certain grammar for things to make sense. Okay, so for this humanity belongs to Socrates, it wouldn't make sense for us to say, for example, human belongs to Socrates. Arguably, maybe from a logical perspective, yes, we could do that, but it's going to be quite difficult to understand. One of the things that we have to just accept is that in a great many cases we need to use natural language to express these ideas. So different things that we want to express sometimes require different grammar. Okay, so the upshot is here that human and humanity, they've got a different grammar, but they correspond to the same concepts. Now I've lost where I was. Okay, so inextricable difficulties. So going back to section 49, continuing from where I left off, inextricable difficulties will envelop us if we allow such a view. There is, of course, a grammatical difference, and this corresponds to a difference as regards relations. So this is what I've just been saying, right? In the first case, the concept in question is used as a concept. So the concept is human, and it's being used as a concept. That is, it is actually predicated of a term or asserted to relate to or more terms. So it's predicated of Socrates. Socrates is the term. So we're talking about this proposition. Socrates is human. Socrates is the term. Human is the concept which is predicated of Socrates. While in the second case, the concept is itself said to have a predicate or a relation. There is therefore no difficulty in accounting for the grammatical difference, but what I wish to urge is that the difference lies solely in external relations and not in the intrinsic nature of the terms. Okay? So, external relations, he's talking about relations between terms. Okay, so the terms themselves are going to have potentially internal relations, which we may or may not be able to analyze. But what he's saying here is that the relations that are involved are external, that is, between terms as opposed to within terms. For suppose that one as adjective differed from one. In fact, I need to go to the next page, don't I? For suppose that one as adjective differed from one as term. Compare with human, humanity. Human as adjective, humanity as term. In this statement, one as adjective has been made into a term. Hence, either it has become one, in which case the supposition is self-contradictory, or there is some other difference between one, that's the word one, and one, the numeral one, in addition to the fact that the first denotes a concept, not a term, while the second denotes a concept which is a term. But in this latter hypothesis, there must be propositions concerning one, the word one, as term. And we shall still have to maintain propositions concerning one, the word, as adjective, as opposed to one, the word, as term. Yet all such propositions must be false, since a proposition about one, the word, as adjective, makes one, the word, the subject, and is therefore really about one, the word, as term. So what he seems to be getting at here is so we've got one, the word, and we've got one, the numeral. Okay, so this is the concept or adjective. Maybe I should use adjective. Yeah, I'll use adjective as opposed to concept. And term. What he's saying is that these really must be one and the same concept. They must refer to one and the same concept. Because if the word one can appear as a term, okay, so does it become this thing here, the numeral one? In which case, if we want to say, for example, one, and I'll put it in commas, one is an adjective. Oh, my writing's got a bit messy. Okay, well, actually, it's not really this one then in that case, is it? If we're wanting to consider somehow it's changed, it must have changed its nature. So on the assumption that one, the word, and one, the numeral, do not correspond to the same concepts, that there is some material change when the role changes from adjective to term, on the assumption that there is some material change, then I can't make an assertion. I can't make such an assertion about one, the word, because one, the word, now has become the term of this proposition. One is an adjective, so really it's one is an adjective. which is blatantly false. One is not an adjective. One is a term. Okay, so every time I try to use one, the word, as a term, it changes its nature into this numeral. So I can't ever seem to make a proposition about one, the word. Okay, so this is what he's getting at here, that the only way that we can resolve this is by accepting that one, the adjective, and one, the term, are actually, they're the same thing. So when one, the word, is put in a situation where it is a term in a proposition, it's still the same. It's still representing the same concept as it does in its role as an adjective. So it's a little bit fiddly, but it does kind of make sense. Whether you agree with it or not, that's an entirely different thing. But it does, at least in my mind, it makes sense. Okay, so in short, if there are any adjectives which could not be made into substantives without change of meaning, all propositions concerning such adjectives, since they would necessarily turn them into substantives, would be false. And so would the proposition that all such propositions are false, since this itself turns the adjectives into substantives. But this state of things is self-contradictory. The above argument proves that we were right in saying that terms embrace everything that can occur in a proposition, with the possible exception of complexes of terms of the kind denoted by any and cognate words. So this is what he's going to be talking about in the next chapter, in chapter 5 on denoting. So we've got these denoting concepts. So we've got all. So I'll use a particular example: all men, every man, any man, a man, and some man. There's also the man, but that's treated separately. It's got its own nuance to it. So these are denoting concepts. They don't denote terms. They denote particular combinations of terms. And it can get it's quite fiddly, actually. I'm going to take some time to explain this when I come on to it. But these denoting concepts denote very specific combinations of terms, except for maybe if we take all men, or if we take a class concept, you, and we form the class all you. All U's are corresponding to the concept of the class all U's. Okay, then unless that class has exactly one term, contains exactly one term, then this denoting concept doesn't denote a term. It denotes a certain combination, very specific combination of terms. I'll be saying more about this in the next chapter. For if A occurs in a proposition, then in this statement, A is the subject. And we've just seen that if A is ever not the subject, it is exactly and numerically the same A, which is not subject in one proposition and is subject in another. Okay, so I think I spoke in the last video about numerical identity. So I can't remember exactly what I said and whether I spoke clearly about it, but if we consider numerical diversity first, numerical diversity is well, if there's any difference at all, we take two genuinely distinct terms, then any amount of difference, no matter how small or how great, then this is numerical diversity. These two terms are genuinely two different terms. There is kind of a limit to this where it may be that two terms are they are two terms, but they are identical in every respect except for the fact that they are two as opposed to one. So this is kind of a limit. And this is kind of the last ultimate difference that you can take away from two distinct terms, really. At which point they effectively become one and the same thing. Okay, so if it were possible for you to remove that final difference, which is their two-ness, then they become one. Okay, they become one term, and that's numerical identity. That's just one of the ways that I kind of understand the concept. Okay, so going back to this, thus the theory that there are adjectives or attributes or ideal things or whatever they may be called, which are in some way less substantial, less self-subsistent, less self-identical than true substantives, appears to be wholly erroneous and to be easily reduced to a contradiction. Terms which are concepts differ from those which are not in respect of self-subsistence, but in virtue of the fact that in certain true or false propositions they occur in a manner which is different in an indefinable way from the manner in which subjects or terms of relations occur. So onto section 50. Two concepts have, in addition to the numerical diversity which belongs to them as terms, another special kind of diversity which may be called conceptual diversity. So this may be characterized by the fact that two propositions in which the concepts occur otherwise than as terms, even if in all other respects the two propositions are identical, yet differ in virtue of the fact that the concepts which occur in them are conceptually diverse. Okay, so this is another type of diversity. So it's entirely conceivable. So let me go on to the next page. It's entirely conceivable that a proposition can be represented by two different concepts. So let's say we've got a subject-predicate proposition. Remember, a proposition is an abstract object. It's got an abstract structure and we can represent it. Okay, so it might be that there are two concepts that we can use to represent that proposition. Two different concepts that we can use to represent that proposition. So this is conceptual diversity. Okay, that we've got a difference in the concepts, but they are these two ways that we're representing the problem. I don't want to give a particular example because whatever example I try to give off the top of my head is probably going to be wrong. But it's entirely conceivable that we've got two different concepts that we can use to express a proposition verbally, but actually it's the same proposition in both cases that's being represented. So this is conceptual diversity. So conceptual diversity implies numerical diversity, but the converse implication does not hold, since not all terms are concepts. Numerical diversity, as its name implies, is the source of plurality, and conceptual diversity is less important to mathematics. But the whole possibility of making different assertions about a given term or set of terms depends upon conceptual diversity, which is therefore fundamental in general logic. He doesn't really say much more about conceptual diversity, if I remember rightly. Yeah, so just looking in the index, it's only this one place that he talks about conceptual diversity. So there's not really anything more to say about it. Okay, on to section 51. It is interesting and not unimportant to examine very briefly the connection of the above doctrine of adjectives with certain traditional views on the nature of propositions. It is customary to regard all propositions as having a subject and a predicate, i.e., as having an immediate this and a general concept attached to it by way of description. This is, of course, an account of the theory in question, which will strike its adherents as extremely crude, but it will serve for a general indication of the view to be discussed. This doctrine develops by internal logical necessity into the theory of Mr. Bradley's logic, which I'm not familiar with, that all words stand for ideas having what he calls meaning, and that in every judgment there is something, the true subject of the judgment, which is not an idea and does not have meaning. To have meaning, it seems to me, is a notion confusedly compounded of logical and psychological elements. Words all have meaning, in the simple sense that they are symbols which stand for something other than themselves. But a proposition, unless it happens to be linguistic, does not itself contain words. It contains the entities indicated by words. Okay, so this goes back to what I was saying earlier in this video, and I think in the last video. Propositions are abstract objects. We can represent them using words. So we can form linguistic propositions, I suppose. Russell does seem to contradict this further down this page, and I'll point it out when we get to it. He does seem to here suggest that propositions are not always verbal, that propositions are something other than linguistic, or can be other than linguistic. But further down the page, he does seem to suggest that propositions are linguistic. It doesn't seem to say it's almost like he's saying that all propositions are linguistic. We'll come to it in a second, and I'll point it out when we get to it. So thus, meaning, in the sense in which words have meaning, is irrelevant to logic. But such concepts as a man have meaning in another sense. They are, so to speak, symbolic in their own logical nature, because they have the property which I call denoting. Again, in the next chapter, this is it's going to spend quite a lot of time talking about a man, denoting concepts such as a man, some man, any man, and so on. That is to say, when a man occurs in a proposition, example, I met a man in the street, the proposition is not about the concept, a man, but about something quite different, some actual biped denoted by the concept. So what he's saying here is that if we say, let me just turn my board a little bit. I met a man in the street. Okay, so if we take this completely, totally, and utterly literally, then this is probably going to be read something like, in a completely ridiculous way, as it's to be understood that I was somehow walking down the street and I met a man. Not an actual person, but maybe the phrase, a man, walking in the other direction or something like that. It's completely absurd. Obviously, that's not what we mean. What we mean when we say, I met a man in the street, means I met an actual person. In fact, Russell will labour this point a little bit at the beginning of chapter 5. So, in other words, this phrase here, this denoting concept, a man, is pointing to something beyond itself. Okay, when we read, I met a man in the street, we're not to take it literally as meaning I met this concept or these words in the street. I met an actual person. I mean, this seems kind of obvious, really, but it's things like this can get a little bit confused when we've got words that are being used to refer to things beyond themselves. So, for example, let's say I've just bought a pet dog and I decide to call it Rover. Okay, so I might say Rover is a dog. Okay, on the one hand. On the other hand, I might say Rover is a 5-letter word. Now, both of these are perfectly understandable. nobody would really bat an eyelid if you were to say either of these things. But the word rover is being used in different senses here. Okay, so in the first case, rover, the word rover, I'm using to refer to my pet dog. So it's correct for me to say Rover is a dog. Okay. But in the second case, I'm talking about the word Rover. Okay, so in the first case, Rover, the word, is certainly not a dog. But in the second case, Rover is a 5-letter word. I'm talking about the word Rover. Okay, but my dog is not a 5-letter word. So there is kind of a shift in how we understand this word. So it can, in some cases, be quite. It might seem kind of obvious to point things out, like when I say I met a man in the street, that I'm talking about an actual man. But by taking this example, you can see why it's actually necessary to kind of dwell on these ideas a little bit, because we do kind of take it for granted that we can use the same word to mean different things. Now, what we can do is, if we do actually want to talk about the word rover, we can kind of put it in inverted commas or something like that. Okay, so this would make it clear that we're talking about the word rover. Rover is a 5-letter word. And in the first case, rover is a dog, rover without inverted commas. If I write something like this, rover in inverted commas is a dog, this is clearly false. The word rover is not a dog. Okay, so let's say I do actually want to write something about a man, the denoting concept, a man. So I might write, for example, a man is a denoting concept, for instance. So this makes it clear that I'm talking about the phrase, effectively, or something like that. Russell doesn't necessarily use inverted commas. He uses italicized letters. I don't know if you can see it too well on the screen. See if I can find an example. If not, we'll be returning to this anyway in the next chapter, because it's such an important thing. So a man is a denoting concept is true. Okay, whereas if I write without the inverted commas, a man is a denoting concept, then this is arguably false, because this now is denoting a certain combination of men. Okay, we'll see in the next case. It doesn't denote any specific man. It denotes a certain combination of men in some kind of impartial way. Okay. Right, so on with the show. Where did I get up to? Thus, concepts of this kind have meaning in a non-psychological sense. And in this sense, when we say this is a man, we are making a proposition in which a concept is, in some sense, attached to what is not a concept. So this is what I was talking about when I was saying that it's kind of that a man, for example, is kind of pointing to something beyond itself. But when meaning is thus understood, the entity indicated by John, italicized, does not have meaning, as Mr. Bradley contends. So I'm not familiar with Mr. Bradley's work, so I can't really say much about this. And even among concepts, it is only those that denote that have meaning. The confusion is largely due, I believe, to the notion that words occur in propositions, which in turn is due to the notion that propositions are essentially mental and are to be identified with cognitions. but these topics of general philosophy must be pursued no further in this work. So you see here, he's kind of suggesting that words, when he says words occur in propositions, well, all propositions or just linguistic propositions? It's not really clear to me what exactly he means there. It's also a little bit confusing when we represent propositions linguistically, verbally, however you want to describe it. Are they propositions or are they representations of propositions? Again, it's not entirely clear exactly what he means at this stage to me. If anybody could help me out a little bit with that, then I'd be very grateful. Okay, so section 52, we're on to verbs. We're coming on to verbs now. I'm not sure how far I'm going to get through this this chapter. I've already rambled on quite a lot, haven't I? Okay, so section 52, it remains to discuss the verb and to find marks by which it is distinguished from the adjective. In regard to verbs also, there is a twofold grammatical form corresponding to a difference in merely external relations. So again, it's these relations between terms as opposed to within within terms. There is the verb in the form which it has as verb. The various inflections of this form may be left out of account. In other words, we've got different like I am, you are, he is, she is, things like this. We've got different forms of the verb. We can kind of ignore these. Yes, they are grammatical differences, but they're kind of insignificant grammatical differences in a very obvious way. And there is the verbal noun indicated by the infinitive, or in English, the present participle. The distinction is that between Felton killed Buckingham and killing no murder. By analysing this difference, the nature and function of the verb will appear. So it is plain to begin with that the concept which occurs in the verbal noun is the very same as that which occurs as verb. Okay, so we're on to the next page here. So again, just like we had human, humanity, two different words, two different grammatical functions, same concept. Here we've got the verb in two different grammatical forms, in its form as a verb proper and in its form of a verbal noun. Okay, but they correspond to, so they've got a grammatical distinction, but they correspond to the same concept. Okay, where was I? So this results from the previous argument that every constituent of every proposition must, on pain of self-contradiction, be capable of being made a logical subject. If we say kills does not mean the same as to kill, we have already made kills a subject, and we cannot say that the concept expressed by the word kills cannot be made a subject. Thus the very verb which occurs as verb can occur also as subject. The question is, what logical difference is expressed by the difference of grammatical form? Okay, and it is plain that the difference must be one in external relations. But in regard to verbs, there is a further point. By transforming the verb as it occurs in a proposition into a verbal noun, the whole proposition can be turned into a single logical subject, no longer asserted, and this is an interesting point to me, and no longer containing in itself truth or falsehood. Okay, so we've got the verb in its role as a verb, and then we've got the verbal noun. So what he's saying is that the verb, when it's used as a genuine verb, then this corresponds to a proposition that somehow contains its own truth or falsehood. Okay. So contains. In fact, I'm not even going to bother writing it actually. But in the case where we've got the verbal noun, so the example that he's going to use is Caesar died for the first one. Caesar died. So here we've got died being used as a verb as a genuine verb here. And then we've also got the death of Caesar. Okay, so I'll put these in inverted commas. So the death of Caesar. So here we've got the death, which is a verbal noun, and something changes here. So these both kind of point, as we'll see, they both, in Russell's opinion, both kind of point towards the same thing, but there is some. When we use the verb in its role as a genuine verb, it's effectively a relation which actually relates. Whereas when we use it in the role of verbal noun, we're considering that a relation as a bare relation, irrespective of what it's of whether it's relating. It's a little bit difficult to get your head around, I guess. But let's continue. Let's see how we get on with it. Where did I get up to? Right. But here too, there seems to be no possibility of maintaining that the logical subject which results is a different entity from the proposition. Caesar died and the death of Caesar will illustrate this point. If we ask what is asserted in the proposition Caesar died, the answer must be the death of Caesar is asserted. In that case, it would seem it is the death of Caesar which is true or false. And yet neither truth nor falsity belongs to a mere logical subject. Okay? The answer here seems to be that the death of Caesar has an external relation to truth or falsehood, as the case may be, whereas Caesar died, in some way or other, contains its own truth or falsehood as an element. Okay, so in other words, the death of Caesar, this kind of has a relation to truth or falsehood, but it doesn't contain its own truth or falsehood. Whereas Caesar died, presumably it still has this relation of truth, relation to truth or falsehood, as the case may be, but it also contains its truth or falsehood as an element. Okay, because when we change from Caesar died to the death of Caesar, we're going to a term. We're changing this into a term. Okay, this proposition, we're making it effectively into a term. Now, actually, Caesar died, the proposition Caesar died, as we'll see, can also be a term. And this does highlight a certain difficulty, which Russell admits that he doesn't really know how to deal with. Okay, but certainly when we go from Caesar died to the death of Caesar, we're changing from potentially a proposition to a term. And a term cannot be, it doesn't have the same properties as a proposition. A proposition seems to contain its truth or falsehood. According to Russell, contains its truth or falsehood as an element. But a term can't. Okay. Because... well, yeah, okay, let's leave it there before I tie myself in knots. Okay, but if this is the correct analysis, it is difficult to see how Caesar died differs from the truth of Caesar's death in the case where it is true, or the falsehood of Caesar's death in the other case. Yes, it is quite plain that the latter, at any rate, is never equivalent to Caesar died. There appears to be an ultimate notion of assertion given by the verb, which is lost as soon as we substitute a verbal noun, and is lost when the proposition in question is made the subject of some other proposition. This does not depend upon grammatical form, for if I say Caesar died as a proposition, so here we're making the proposition Caesar died into a term, without the change of grammatical form. We're just taking Caesar died as it is, and now we're making it a term. So, for if I say Caesar died as a proposition, I do not assert that Caesar did die, and an element which is present in Caesar died has disappeared. Thus, the contradiction, which was to have been avoided, of an entity which cannot be made a logical subject, appears to have here become inevitable. And here he says, this difficulty, which seems to be inherent in the very nature of truth and falsehood, is one with which I do not know how to deal satisfactorily. So, you know, he's usually quite honest about these things, is Russell. He's got some very strong views on certain aspects, but when he doesn't know how to solve a problem, he usually holds his hands up and says, look, I don't know how to deal with this. So either we're gonna leave it to one side for now and deal with it later, or I'm going to leave it for somebody else to deal with, because it's possibly in a way irrelevant at this stage, or just it's not worth the time. So the most obvious course would be to say that the difference between an asserted and an unasserted proposition is not logical but psychological. In the sense in which false propositions may be asserted, this is doubtless true. But there is another sense of assertion, very difficult to bring clearly before the mind, and yet quite undeniable, in which only true propositions are asserted. True and false propositions alike are, in some sense, entities, and are, in some sense, capable of being logical subjects. But when a proposition happens to be true, it has a further quality over and above that which it shares with false propositions. And it is this further quality which is what I mean by assertion in a logical as opposed to a psychological sense. And then he goes on to say, the nature of truth, however, belongs no more to the principles of mathematics than to the principles of everything else. I therefore leave this question to the logicians with the above brief indication of a difficulty. Okay, on to the next page. So we're on to section 53. So it may be asked whether everything that, in the logical sense, we are concerned with is a verb, expresses a relation or not. It seems plain that if we were right in holding that Socrates is human, is a proposition having only one term, the is in this proposition cannot express a relation in the ordinary sense. A relation, typically we would expect a relation to relate more than one term. But here we've only got one term, but we've still got a verb in the proposition. So, in fact, subject-predicate propositions are distinguished by just this non-relational character. Nevertheless, a relation between Socrates and humanity is certainly implied. Aha, okay, so we've got Socrates. Socrates is human. So we've got a single term here. The verb here is, but it's non-relational according to Russell. It's a subject-predicate form. So we've got the subject here, we've got the predicate here, we've got the assertion, the verb. But this proposition implies a relation between the two terms humanity and Socrates. Okay, so grammatical change now. Humanity belongs to Socrates. So in other words, what he seems to be saying is that a non-relational subject-predicate proposition implies a relational proposition, right? A relational proposition. So the relation here is expressed by belongs to, that's the verb. Or belongs is the verb, I guess. And the two terms are humanity and Socrates. Okay, so we've got a genuine relational proposition here, and which is implied by the non-relational proposition Socrates is human. And it is very difficult to conceive the proposition as expressing no relation at all. We may perhaps say that it is a relation. So he's talking about here the Socrates is human. So even though it's a non-relational proposition, he's saying it's difficult to conceive that the proposition is expressing no relation at all. So even though it's a non-relational proposition, there still seems to be some kind of underlying relation that implies this relational proposition, presumably. We may perhaps say that it is a relation, although it is distinguished from other relations, and that it does not permit itself to be regarded as an assertion concerning either of its terms indifferently, but only as an assertion concerning the referent. Okay, the referent being Socrates. A similar remark may apply to the proposition A is, which holds of every term without exception. Remember what he said earlier about terms. To deny that such and such a thing is a term must always be false. Okay, so if A is a term, he also says that terms are where is it? So we're going back to section 47 here. Whatever may be an object of thought or may occur in any true or false proposition or can be counted as one I call a term. And he gives some synonyms, one of which is entity. And he says that this word is derived from the fact that every term has being, i.e. is in some sense. So then he goes on to say that to deny that such and such a thing is a term must always be false. So if A is a term, A is cannot be denied. Okay, so the is here is quite different from the is in Socrates Socrates is human. Okay, so the same words, same verb may have different meanings in different contexts. Okay, it might represent different relations. Might not necessarily be a relation, but some kind of property, I guess. So when we say A is, the term A is, we're kind of hinting at some kind of existence, some kind of being. Okay, whereas when we say Socrates is human, there's no suggestion that we're talking about existence in any sense. There, we're talking about Socrates having some sort of characteristic, some sort of property. So okay, the is here is quite different from the is in Socrates is human. It may be regarded as complex and as really predicating being of A. So he's talking about A is, the proposition A is. In this way, the true logical verb in a proposition may be always regarded as asserting a relation. But it is so hard to know exactly what is meant by relation that the whole question is in danger of becoming purely verbal. The twofold nature, so section 54, the twofold nature of the verb as actual verb and as verbal noun may be expressed if all verbs are held to be relations as the difference between a relation in itself and a relation actually relating. So this is what I was talking about earlier. So if we've got Caesar died, we've got okay, so maybe that's not the best case. Let's use the case that he's talking about here. So he's using the case A differs from B. Okay, so A differs from B. And on the other hand, he's going to talk about effectively the difference of A and B. I guess. I can't find it. But here so A differs from B. We've got the verb here, differs, and it is actually relating A and B. Okay. So, but if we change this to the difference of A and B, then we're effectively, the verbs become a verbal noun. We're treating it as a relation, as a bare relation. Okay, it's in that context, even though there's mention of A and B, it's not, we don't understand it as actually relating A and B. Again, this is all Russell's perspective. All I'm trying to do is to explain and describe Russell's perspective. I'm not necessarily agreeing with all of this stuff or disagreeing with it. I'm just trying to present it as it is to the best of my understanding. So consider, for example, the proposition A differs from B. The constituents of this proposition, so constituents he uses in a kind of informal sense here, just the parts. if we analyze it, appear to be only A, difference, and B. Yet these constituents, thus placed side by side, do not reconstitute the proposition. Okay, so A, difference, B. Okay, we could reconstitute the proposition A differs from B or B differs from A. These may be equivalent propositions, but they're not the same proposition. So what he's saying is that a proposition, when it's analysed, potentially something gets lost. Not always. There are certain propositions where he kind of agrees that, particularly the subject-predicate type of proposition, when these are analysed, really nothing is lost along the way. But when we've got more complex propositions where we've got more than one term involved, and therefore we're going to have a relation involved, something gets lost. And part of this, I guess, is because relations have sense. Okay, there's a kind of direction to a relation. The difference which occurs in the proposition actually relates A and B, whereas the difference after analysis is a notion which has no connection with A and B. So it's just we're just considering it as a relation. And it may be said, where am I up to? Okay. It may be said that we ought in the analysis to mention the relations which difference has to A and B, relations which are expressed by is and from, when we say A is different from B. So these relations consist in the fact that A is referent and B relatum with respect to difference, but A, referent, difference, relatum, B is still merely a list of terms, not a proposition. A proposition, in fact, is essentially a unity. So if we can think about those that list of words, we've still got kind of the same problem that we had before when we had A, difference, B. How do we reconstitute the proposition? Is it A differs from B or B differs from A? Similarly, if we've got A, reference, difference, relatum, B, okay, yes, these are written in a particular order, but the order is that's just kind of an accidental feature of how we have to write things on the page. So if we were just given these words at random, say, or in a random order, would we be able to reconstitute the original proposition, A is different from B? Well, we might do, but we also might not. We might form a different proposition. Again, we might reconstitute A differs from B, or A is different from B, but we might also get the reference and the relatum mixed up and get B is different from A. Again, they might be equivalent propositions, but they're not the same. So he goes on to say, this is quite interesting in my opinion. So a proposition, in fact, is essentially a unity. And when analysis has destroyed the unity, no enumeration of constituents will restore the proposition. The verb, when used as a verb, embodies the unity of the proposition and is thus distinguishable from the verb considered as a term, though I do not know how to give a clear account of the precise nature of the distinction. So it may be doubted whether the general concept's difference occurs at all in the proposition A differs from B. So we're on to section 55 here. Or whether there is not rather a specific difference of A and B, and another specific difference seen. Okay, so what he's saying here is, if we take two different terms, A and B, so let's take four different terms, A, B, C, and D. Okay, so A and B are different. There is. So what he's getting at is the difference when we say that A differs from B. There's a certain relation that we're expressing between A and B to say that A differs from B, and when we say that C differs from D, There's a certain relation that we're commenting on there. Is it the same relation that we're talking about each time, or is it a different relation? So in other words, between any two different terms, is it always the same difference that we're talking about? Is it always the same relation of difference that we're talking about? Or is it between these two terms, it's a specific relation of difference that we're talking about, and between another two different terms, it's a different relation of difference, a separate, maybe I should say, relation of difference, or a distinct relation of difference. So in other words, between any two pair of distinct terms, is there a unique type of a unique relation of difference corresponding to those two terms and no other terms? Or is it that there is kind of a bare minimum difference, relation of difference, and then on top of that, between any two specific terms, we've got a specific difference? Is that a possibility? So this is what he's going to be investigating as we go through. And this is interesting if you're into this kind of thing. If you're not, then, you know, this can get quite tedious and boring, I guess. For me, I find this interesting. So let's go through it. Let's see what he says. So I'm going to start again with section 55. It may be doubted whether the general concept's difference occurs at all in the proposition A differs from B, or whether there is not rather a specific difference of A and B and another specific difference of C and D, which are respectively affirmed in A differs from B and C differs from D. In this way, difference becomes a class concept of which there are as many instances as there are pairs of different terms. And the instances may be said, in Platonic phrase, to partake of the nature of difference. As this point is quite vital in the theory of relations, it may be well to dwell upon it. And first of all, I must point out that in A differs from B, I intend to consider the bare numerical difference in virtue of which they are two, not difference in this or that respect. So effectively, the bare numerical difference. So this is what I was talking about earlier in the video, where things can there might be many differences. Take two terms, there might be many differences between them, but there's kind of a limiting difference whereby two terms may conceivably be identical in every respect except for the fact that they are two terms as opposed to one. So that's what he's talking about here. Well, in fact, no, he's not necessarily denying that there are other differences between the two terms, but that there is this minimum difference which we can express, which is that two terms are two terms as opposed to one term. Okay, so he's not actually denying here that there might actually be other differences involved, but it's just that there must at least be this difference. So let us first try the hypothesis that a difference is a complex notion, compounded of difference together with some special quality distinguishing a particular difference from every other particular difference. So far as the relation of difference itself is concerned, we are to suppose that no distinction can be made between different cases. But there are to be different associated qualities in different cases. But since cases are distinguished by their terms, the quality must be primarily associated with the terms, not with the difference. If the quality be not a relation, it can have no special connection with the difference of A and B, which it was to render distinguishable from bare difference. And if it fails in this, it becomes irrelevant. So I need to read that again because I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. There's a lot to take in there. I know what it says, but I just need to read through it again. So let us first try the hypothesis that a difference is a complex notion, compounded of difference together with some special quality, distinguishing a particular difference from every other particular difference. So far as the relation of difference itself is concerned, we are to suppose that no distinction can be made between different cases. But there are to be different associated qualities in different cases. But since cases are distinguished by their terms, the quality must be primarily associated with the terms, not with difference. Okay, so right, so the difference, if the quality be not a relation, right, so that the difference is inheres in the terms themselves. I think that's what he's getting at here. It doesn't the difference doesn't attach to the relation. There is right, so there is, it is difficult to understand, isn't it, actually? Distinguishing a particular difference. So he's talking about the relation of difference. So that to me suggests that he's talking about a single relation of difference. Okay, so there is a yeah, okay. So I've just lost track of where my train of thought. This happens when you do unscripted videos. Okay, so yeah, there's a bare difference that can be expressed. Yeah, so yeah, what he was saying, right? So of course, I intended to consider the bare numerical difference in virtue of which they are two not different in this or that respect. So what he's saying here is that there is this difference, there is this bare numerical difference between two terms, but any other difference is kind of it inheres in the terms, as opposed to it relates to the terms directly as opposed to the relation of difference. I think that's what he's kind of getting at here, and that's what he means when he says it's it becomes irrelevant if the quality, since the cases are distinguished by their terms, the quality must be primarily associated with the terms, not with difference, the relation, difference. If the quality be not a relation, it can have no special connection with the difference of A and B, which it was to render distinguishable from bare difference. And if it fails, then it becomes irrelevant, right? Because it's nothing to do with, it's not a relation. It's something to do with the terms. On the other hand, if it be a new relation between A and B over and above difference, right? Okay, so yeah, I'm on track now. I hope. We shall have to hold that any two terms have two relations, difference and a specific difference, the latter not holding between any other pair of terms. Right, okay, so let me try to write this on here. So we've got these two different cases. So we've got A and B, and we've got this relation of difference between them. But this is the bare minimum relation of difference. As he says in the previous paragraph, the bare numerical difference in virtue of which they are two, not difference in this or that respect. So any other difference, what he's the first case that he's considering is that if there are other differences, one possibility is that those differences relate to the terms themselves, in which case it's completely irrelevant to us. Okay. On the other hand, what he's saying is that there may be this bare minimum of difference, but there may also be so this is kind of a generic, the bare minimum difference, but then there's also this specific difference. So there's actually two relations, at least, I guess. But then there's a specific difference between A and B. So we've got this bare minimum difference, and then we've got this other relation on top, this specific difference. I've lost where I was now. So this view is a combination of two others, of which the first holds that the abstract general relation of difference holds between A and B, while the second holds that when two terms differ, they have, corresponding to this fact, a specific relation of difference, unique and unanalyzable, and not shared by any other pair of terms. So any two terms that differ must have this general relation of difference between them, But then between any two pairs of terms, there is also this specific difference. Either of these views may be held with either the denial or the affirmation of the other. Let us see what is to be said for and against them. Against the notion of specific differences, it may be urged that if differences differ, their differences from each other must also differ, and thus we are led into an endless process. Those who object to endless processes will see in this a proof that differences do not differ. But in the present work, it will be maintained that there are no contradictions peculiar to the notion of infinity, and that an endless process is not to be objected to unless it arises in the analysis of the actual meaning of a proposition. In the present case, the process is one of implications, not one of analysis. It must therefore be regarded as harmless. Okay, so if you object to these endless processes, then you may be of the opinion that this is proof that differences do not differ. Russell disagrees with this. He says, no, we can have these, in this particular case, we can have this endless process of differences because it's harmless in this particular case, because it doesn't have any bearing on the analysis of the actual meaning of a proposition. Okay, we'll take his word for that. Against the notion that the abstract relation of difference holds between A and B, we have the argument derived from the analysis of A differs from B, which gave rise to the present discussion. It is to be observed that the hypothesis which combines the general and the specific difference must suppose that there are two distinct propositions, the one affirming the general, the other the specific difference. Thus, if there cannot be a general difference between A and B, this mediating hypothesis is also impossible. And we saw that the attempt to avoid the failure of analysis by including in the meaning of A differs from B the relations of difference to A and B was vain. I don't really know what he's talking about here, to be honest with you. This attempt, in fact, leads to an endless process of the inadmissible kind. For we shall have to include the relations of the said relations to A and B and difference and so on, and in this continually increasing complexity we are supposed to be only analysing the meaning of our original proposition. This argument establishes a point of very great importance, namely that when a relation holds between two terms, the relation of the relation to the terms and of these relations to the relation and the terms and so on ad infinitum, though all implied by the proposition affirming the original relation, form no part of the meaning of this proposition. But the above argument does not suffice to prove that the relation of A to B cannot be abstract difference. It remains tenable that, as was suggested to begin with, the true solution lies in regarding every proposition as having a kind of unity which analysis cannot preserve, and which is lost even though it be mentioned by analysis as an element in the proposition. This view has doubtless its own difficulties, but the view that no two pairs of terms can have the same relation both contains difficulties of its own and fails to solve the difficulty for the sake of which it was invented. For even if the difference of A and B be absolutely peculiar to A and B, still the three terms A, B, difference of A from B do not reconstitute the proposition A differs from B, any more than A and B and difference did. And it seems plain that even if differences did differ, they would still have to have something in common. But the most general way in which two terms can have something in common is by both having a given relation to a given term. Hence, if no two pairs of terms can have the same relation, it follows that no two terms can have anything in common, and hence different differences will not be in any definable sense instances of difference. I conclude then that the relation affirmed between A and B in the proposition A differs from B is the general relation of difference and is precisely and numerically the same as the relation affirmed between C and D in C differs from D. Okay, so there's quite a lot, to be honest with you, that I don't fully understand. Do I need to go into the next page? There's still quite a lot there that I don't really understand if I'm totally honest with you. But he does eventually arrive at the conclusion that when we say A differs from B and C differs from D, we're talking about the same general relation of difference. And this doctrine must be held for the same reasons to be true of all other relations. He goes on to say, relations do not have instances, but are strictly the same in all propositions in which they occur. We may now sum up the main points elicited in our discussion of the verb. The verb we saw is a concept which, like the adjective, may occur in a proposition without being one of the terms of the proposition, though it may also be made into a logical subject. Remember, so what I said in the last video, it's possible if we've got a particular there's a particular proposition that we can find, and if we consider all of the analyses of that particular proposition, the analyses using the method and technique of outlined in and described in chapter 3, if a certain word in our representation of that proposition never occurs as a subject in any of the analyses of that proposition, then that word is either an adjective or a verb. Okay. Now that's not to say that in other propositions, the analyses of other propositions, that word doesn't never occurs as a subject. It's just that as long as we can find a proposition where this particular word doesn't occur as subject in any of the analyses of that proposition, then that word is either a verb or an object, or a verb or an adjective. One verb and one only must occur as verb in every proposition, but every proposition, by turning its verb into a verbal noun, can be changed into a single logical subject of a kind which I shall call in future a propositional concept. I'm not sure that he uses that. Propositional concept. So he doesn't seem to use that from memory. It's strange that he should point that out. Propositional. Oh, no, he does. Oh, I don't read these pages very often. 511. Right. Okay. So in the appendices. Okay. I need to remind myself what's in the appendices. Every verb in the logical sense of the word may be regarded as a relation. When it occurs as verb, it actually relates, but when it occurs as verbal noun, it is the bare relation considered independently of the terms which it relates. That's what I was saying earlier, or trying to say. I don't know if I made a good job of it. Verbs do not, like adjectives, have instances, but are identical in all the cases of their occurrence. Owing to the way in which the verb actually relates the terms of a proposition, every proposition has a unity which renders it distinct from the sum of its constituents. All these points lead to logical problems which, in a treatise on logic, would deserve to be fully and thoroughly discussed. Finally, having now given a general sketch of the nature of verbs and adjectives, I shall proceed in the next two chapters to discussions arising out of the consideration of adjectives, and in chapter 7 to topics connected with verbs. Broadly speaking, classes are connected with adjectives, while propositional functions involve verbs. It is for this reason that it has been necessary to deal at such length with a subject which might seem at first sight to be somewhat remote from the principles of mathematics. Okay, so that brings us to the end of chapter 4. I've not made a very good job at keeping up with everything on the screen, but as I advised in the last video, it's probably a good idea to have your own copy of Principles of Mathematics available to you, so you can read along with me, and you can refer to the other sections that I mentioned. So in the next video, I'm going to make a start on chapter 5 on denoting, which is an interesting chapter. although there are some particularly difficult, very fine distinctions that are gonna be made, and it takes a bit of time to try to get your head around some of the distinctions that Russell makes from time to time. And I can't say, in all honesty, that I feel absolutely confident in my own ability to do that, but I'll try my best. And then we're going to be looking at classes. So you mentioned propositional functions. The chapter on propositional functions, I have to say right now, I don't really understand the chapter on propositional functions. That's chapter 7. So I'm going to keep working at that. But I really don't understand it very well. The chapter 8 on the variable is a little bit easier to understand. So we'll see how it goes anyway. So I've not decided how far I'm going to go with this. Particularly this first part of Principles of Mathematics is quite philosophical in nature. I might I'll do as much as I can, and then possibly, if I feel like it, I might jump onto part 2. It's where it gets a bit more mathematical, although it is still quite philosophical in nature, to be perfectly honest with you. So it's just a difficult book. It's just an all-round difficult book, and you've got to take the time to try and understand it if that's what you want to do. Okay, so hopefully I'm helping people to understand it, but I can't claim to understand all of the contents of this book. I'm just trying to express some of my views, some of my ideas, and hopefully they will be useful to somebody somewhere at some time. So hopefully you found something useful in this video. I know it's been quite slow paced. Sometimes I've had to think quite carefully about some of the things that I wanted to say, but I have warned about this in my videos, that when I'm doing unscripted videos, sometimes I've got to think. Okay, and sometimes, yes, I do get lost in the video. So okay, I'd be really grateful if you would consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and leaving a nice positive comment in the comments section. If you've got any questions about anything that I've said in this video, so I'm sure there's going to be plenty of things that I've not explained terribly clearly. Feel free to ask any questions that you have. I'll be more than happy to try to answer any questions. If you've got any recommendations for things that you'd like me to take a look at, any other works that you'd like me to take a look at, feel free to let me know. Congratulations if you made it this far through the video, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next video.